My daughter Sarah called me crying at 11:30 last night. Through her sobs, she managed to tell me that her fiancé David had just informed her that my presence at their wedding tomorrow was causing problems. Apparently, his wealthy family considered me an embarrassment. A simple construction worker who built houses with his bare hands wasn't sophisticated enough for their country club crowd. What Sarah didn't know was that the crying would stop soon, and David Sterling III would learn exactly who he'd just insulted. The first time I met David Sterling III was 18 months ago on a humid Sunday afternoon in July. Sarah had called earlier that week, her voice bubbling with excitement about bringing someone special to our traditional family dinner. At 68 years old, I'd been through enough of Sarah's relationships to know when she was serious about someone. This time felt different. David pulled up to our modest two-story colonial in a silver Mercedes that probably cost more than I made in 3 years, back when I was starting out. He stepped out wearing pressed khakis and a polo shirt that screamed, "Prep school privilege." But when he shook my hand, his grip was firm, and he looked me straight in the eye. "Mr. Morrison, it's an honor to meet you," he said. "Sarah speaks so highly of you." Sarah beamed beside him, her dark hair catching the afternoon sun. My daughter, my only child since her mother passed 10 years ago, looked happier than I'd seen her in years. Dinner started well enough. David complimented my late wife Helen's recipes that I'd learned to cook over the years. He asked about my construction business, seeming genuinely interested when I explained how I'd started with just a hammer and a truck, eventually building Morrison Construction into a company with 40 employees. But then came the subtle digs. When I offered him a beer from my cooler, he politely declined, mentioning something about preferring more refined beverages. When Sarah showed him my den, where I kept my collection of architectural books and building plans, he seemed surprised. "You actually read these?" he asked, picking up a copy of Engineering News Record. "Every week for 35 years, I replied, watching his expression shift. "How thorough of you," he said, setting it down like it might leave newsprint on his manicured hands. The evening progressed with more small slights. Our quaint house, the rustic charm of our neighborhood, the simple pleasures of middle-class life. Each comment delivered with a smile that never quite reached his eyes. 6 months later, David proposed to Sarah at a restaurant I couldn't pronounce the name of. The ring was massive, the kind of diamond that caught light from across a room and threw it back in sharp, cold sparkles. Sarah called me breathless with joy, and I swallowed my growing unease. If she was happy, that's what mattered. The engagement dinner at the Sterling estate changed everything. Their house wasn't a house. It was a monument to excess. Marble floors that echoed with every step. Paintings that belonged in museums. A dining room table that could seat 20. David's parents, David Jr. and Patricia Sterling, greeted us with the kind of politeness reserved for unwelcome necessities. Patricia air-kissed Sarah while looking over her shoulder at me, like I might track mud on her Persian rugs. David Jr. shook my hand with the enthusiasm of someone handling raw fish. Throughout dinner, they directed every question to Sarah. Her work at the marketing firm, her education at State University, though Patricia made sure to mention David's Princeton degree twice, her ambitious plans for the future. I might as well have been furniture. The moment that sealed my suspicion came when I excused myself to find the bathroom. These old houses, no matter how fancy, all have thin walls in certain spots. I heard Patricia's voice, carrying from the parlor where she'd gathered with her society friends. "She's a lovely girl considering," Patricia said. "Obviously marrying up, but at least she has career ambitions. We'll just have to tolerate her father. Thank goodness he's the quiet type. Can you imagine if he actually tried to involve himself in the wedding planning?" The cackling laughter that followed made my jaw clench. But I'd learned long ago that the best foundation is one you lay carefully, stone by stone. I returned to dinner with a smile, playing the part of the grateful blue-collar father. 3 weeks later, Sarah asked if I could help move some boxes from her apartment to David's penthouse. She had a presentation at work, and David was traveling for business. I arrived with my pickup truck ready to do what fathers do. David's apartment was exactly what you'd expect from a Sterling. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Furniture that looked like it belonged in a magazine. A kitchen with appliances I couldn't name. I was loading boxes in the home office when a folder fell from David's desk. Papers scattered across the floor, and as I knelt to gather them, certain words jumped out. Prenuptial agreement. Separate property. No claim to Sterling family assets. But it was the clause about adultery that stopped me cold. If Sarah was unfaithful, she'd forfeit everything. If David was unfaithful, the agreement stated it would be addressed privately within the family. The double standard was as clear as the skyline view from his window. I photographed every page with my phone before carefully replacing them exactly as they'd fallen. Sarah didn't need to know yet. Sometimes the best move is to wait and watch, gathering information like a careful builder, checking every beam before raising a wall. The drafting date on those papers was 2 weeks before David had even proposed. He'd been planning this from the beginning, seeing my daughter not as a partner, but as an accessory to his life. The kind you could return if it didn't match the decor. I spent the drive home thinking about Helen, my wife. She would have known what to do. She always did. But Helen was gone, and protecting Sarah fell to me alone now. David Sterling III thought he was marrying beneath his station. He had no idea how far above him my daughter truly stood. The months that followed were an education in patience. I watched David slowly separate Sarah from her old friends, always with reasonable explanations. I noticed how he'd correct her pronunciation of wine names at restaurants, making her feel small. I observed the way he'd check his phone whenever she talked about her work, only engaging when the conversation turned to his family's connections. But I also saw Sarah's light dimming so gradually, she didn't notice. The woman who'd once presented marketing campaigns with confidence now second-guessed every decision. The daughter, who used to call me twice a week, now apologized for bothering me with her problems. David Sterling III was reshaping my daughter into something more suitable for his world. What he didn't understand was that some foundations run too deep to be demolished. He was about to learn that lesson the hard way. The Sterling family's takeover of the wedding planning began exactly 2 weeks after I found that prenuptial agreement. Sarah arrived at my house on a Thursday evening wedding binders, spilling from her arms, her face flushed with what I first mistook for excitement. "Dad, you won't believe how generous David's mother is being," she said, spreading color swatches and venue photos across my kitchen table. "She's connected with all the best vendors in the city. She says she wants to handle everything as their gift to us." I poured her favorite tea chamomile with honey, the same drink I'd made her during high school study sessions. "That's thoughtful of her. What kind of wedding were you thinking about?" Sarah's hands stilled on a photo of an elaborate ballroom. "Well, I always imagined something in a garden, maybe 50 close friends and family. Remember how Mom loved those outdoor ceremonies?" "I remember," I said softly. Helen had planned Sarah's wedding in her mind 1,000 times during those last months. Simple elegance, she'd called it. Fresh flowers and genuine smiles. But Patricia says outdoor weddings are too unpredictable. Sarah continued, her voice taking on a rehearsed quality. "And the Sterling family has certain expectations. There are business associates, social obligations." Over the following weeks, I watched every personal touch Sarah suggested get vetoed by the Sterling machine. Her childhood friend Emma, who'd started a small floral business, wasn't established enough to handle the arrangements. The photographer Sarah loved had a too artistic style. The jazz quartet she discovered was replaced by a chamber orchestra that David's father golfed with. One evening, I found Sarah crying in her old bedroom during one of her visits. She was staring at a guest list that had ballooned to 400 names, only 30 of which she recognized. "I don't even know these people, Dad," she whispered. "Patricia says they're essential for maintaining family connections, but this doesn't feel like my wedding anymore." I sat beside her on the bed, where I'd once read her bedtime stories. "Sweetheart, you know I've saved for your wedding since you were born. $120,000 invested carefully waiting for this day. We could plan something that's truly yours." Sarah's eyes filled with fresh tears. "I mentioned that to David. He said accepting money from you would be, he called it inappropriate, given the different financial situations. He said his family would be embarrassed if people knew you'd contributed." The word embarrassed settled in my chest like a stone. I'd built their precious country club. My crews had renovated half the estates in their neighborhood. But my money wasn't good enough for their event. "What matters is your happiness," I managed to say, though the words tasted bitter. "David says this is how things are done in his world," Sarah replied. "I need to learn to fit in if I'm going to be a Sterling." That night, I made my first strategic move. My lawyer, Robert Chen, had handled Morrison Construction's contracts for 20 years. Despite the Sterling family's probable objections to his last name, Robert was the sharpest legal mind I knew. "I need you to look into the Sterling family businesses," I told him over coffee the next morning. "Particularly their vendor payments and financial patterns." Robert raised an eyebrow. "Any particular reason?" "Call it a father's intuition." While Robert conducted his research, I began my own investigation. The wedding was set for the Sterling Country Club, a place where I'd actually overseen renovations 5 years earlier. I still had connections there, people who remembered the contractor, who treated them with respect, unlike the members who saw them as invisible. Miguel, the head of maintenance, met me for lunch at a diner far from the country club's sphere of influence. "The Sterlings." He shook his head. "They're 6 months behind on their food and beverage minimum. Keep promising to settle up after some big business deal." "Their events?" I asked. "Always spectacular. Always partially paid. They're masters at keeping vendors hanging on with promises and connections." This information pattern repeated everywhere I looked. The florist Patricia insisted on using was owed $40,000 from the Sterling's last event. The caterer had been waiting 8 months for final payment on David Jr.'s birthday gala. Yet they all continued working with the family, hoping to stay in their good graces. Meanwhile, the prenuptial agreement haunted my thoughts. I needed to know more about David III's personal finances. That's when I called Tommy Rodriguez, my old Army buddy, who'd become a private investigator after our tours in Vietnam. "Jesse Morrison." Tommy's gravelly voice came through the phone. "Been too long, brother. What's the mission?" I explained the situation, and Tommy's tone shifted from friendly to professional. "Give me 2 weeks. I'll find what you need." During those 2 weeks, the wedding planning escalated into full Sterling control. Sarah was told her maid of honor, her college roommate Lisa, needed to be demoted to bridesmaid because David's sister deserved the position. The menu Sarah had carefully selected was scrapped for what Patricia deemed more sophisticated options. The breaking point came when I attended a planning meeting at my daughter's request. The Sterling women had commandeered a private room at the country club, spreading their authority like an occupying force. "Mr. Morrison." Patricia barely glanced up from her seating charts. "How nice of you to come." Sarah asked me to help with the logistics. I said, taking a seat at the table. Patricia's smile could have frozen hellfire. "That's sweet, but we have everything under control. Perhaps you could help by ensuring your side of the guest list is kept to a reasonable number. We've allocated 20 seats for Sarah's family and friends." 20. I kept my voice level. "Out of 400. "Well, we must maintain certain proportions," Patricia replied. "David's family has extensive business obligations." David's sister Brittany, a younger version of her mother, added, "Besides, it's not like construction workers would feel comfortable at such an elegant affair." The silence that followed could have been measured with surveying equipment. Sarah's face had gone pale, her hands trembling slightly around her planning binder. "My crews built this club," I said quietly. "Every beam, every tile, every elegant detail your guests admire." "How industrious," Patricia managed. I stood, placing a gentle hand on Sarah's shoulder. "Sweetheart, you know where to find me when you're ready to plan your wedding, not theirs." As I left, I heard Patricia mutter to Brittany about sensitivity issues in the working class. Tommy's report arrived the next day, and it was more damning than I'd imagined. David Sterling III had accumulated nearly $300,000 in gambling debts from underground poker games. He'd been skimming from his trust fund and taking advances on his salary at his father's firm. The wedding, it seemed, was as much about maintaining appearances as it was about marriage. But the most interesting discovery was that Jennifer Walsh, CEO of the company where Sarah worked, would be attending the wedding. The Sterlings were desperately courting her husband's investment firm for a merger that would save their failing business ventures. Sarah's connection to Jennifer was one of David's primary assets in the relationship. I filed this information away, adding it to my growing foundation of knowledge. Every good builder knows you don't start construction until you've surveyed every inch of the ground you're building on. The vendor situation grew more interesting as the wedding approached. I quietly reached out to each one, presenting myself as a concerned father, wanting to ensure everything went smoothly. Their stories were variations on a theme: partial payments, broken promises, and the constant hope that this time would be different. The country club itself was the most precarious situation. They were owed $50,000 for previous Sterling events, and the wedding would add another $60,000 to that tab. The general manager, a man named Charles, whom I'd worked with during the renovation, was at his breaking point. "If they don't pay after this wedding, I'll have to cut them off completely," he confided. "The board is asking questions I can't answer anymore." "What if someone covered their outstanding balance?" I asked carefully. Charles studied me with the weary eyes of a man who'd dealt with too many promises. That someone would essentially own the event. Full control over vendors, guests, everything. It's in the contract. I thanked him and left another piece sliding into place on my mental blueprint. The Sterlings thought they were orchestrating a grand performance to save their sinking ship. They had no idea the stage itself was about to become mine. 3 days before the wedding, Sarah came to me with the final guest list. My side had been reduced to 15 people. Her best friend from childhood wasn't included because she was too pregnant to look good in photos. Her mentor from work was excluded because he'd been divorced twice. Every exclusion came with Patricia's poisonous reasoning. "I'm sorry, Dad," Sarah said, and I could see the war in her eyes between the woman I'd raised and the Sterling wife she was being molded into. "David says after we're married, we can have a small reception for everyone else. After you're locked into that prenup." The words escaped before I could stop them. Sarah froze. What prenup? David said he didn't believe in them, that they were for people who expected to fail. The lie was so blatant, it took my breath away. I made a decision that would have made Helen proud or furious, maybe both. "Sweetheart, there's something you need to know." But my phone rang before I could continue. Tommy's name flashed on the screen. "Jesse, you need to hear this. David's been having an affair with a paralegal at his firm. Been going on 4 months. I've got photos, credit card records, the works." I looked at my daughter, still waiting for me to explain about the prenup, and realized the wedding was less than 72 hours away. The Sterlings had built their house of cards on my daughter's trust and my assumed ignorance. It was time to show them what a real construction expert could do with a faulty foundation. 24 hours before the wedding, I was sitting in my home office reviewing the final pieces of my research when my phone rang. Sarah's name appeared on the screen, but the strangled sob that greeted me when I answered sent ice through my veins. "Dad." Her voice was barely recognizable through the tears. "I need to tell you something. David he said—" "Slow down, sweetheart. Take a breath." I heard her trying to compose herself, hiccuping through tears. In the background, I could make out David's voice, sharp and impatient. "Just tell him already. We don't have time for dramatics." "David wants to talk to you," Sarah managed. "He says it's about tomorrow." There was a rustling as the phone changed hands, and then David Sterling III's voice filled my ear with all the warmth of a January wind. "Jesse, we need to discuss tomorrow's arrangements." "I'm listening." "There's been a slight change in plans. Some very important investors will be attending, people who could make or break a crucial merger for our family's firm. Their presence requires us to be more selective about our guest list. I remained silent, letting him fill the void with his own poison. What I'm trying to say? He continued, his tone shifting to what he probably thought was diplomatic, is that we need to ensure tomorrow presents the right image. You understand business, Jesse. Sometimes we have to make tough choices. What kind of tough choices? He sighed, as if I were a slow student failing to grasp a simple concept. We only want important people at our wedding. People who can contribute to the kind of future Sarah deserves. I'm sure you want what's best for her. And I'm not important enough. It's not about importance in the emotional sense, David said, though I could hear the smirk in his voice. It's about professional networks, social capital. The construction industry is noble work, of course, but tomorrow is about surrounding ourselves with leaders of finance, technology, international business. You understand, right? It's nothing personal, just business. In 45 years of building, I'd learned that the most dangerous cracks in a structure are the ones people try to paint over. David Sterling III had just shown me every weakness in his foundation. I understand perfectly, I said, keeping my voice steady as granite. Excellent. I knew you'd be reasonable. Sarah's been getting herself worked up over nothing. We'll make sure to have a nice family dinner after the honeymoon somewhere more comfortable for you. David, I said, let me talk to Sarah. She's too emotional right now. Women in weddings, you know how it is. Just trust that we're doing what's best for everyone. The line went dead. I sat in my chair for exactly 30 seconds, letting the full weight of the insult settle. Then I reached for my phone and began making calls. The first was to my brother Marcus in Washington, D.C. Marcus had taken a different path than construction, graduating from Harvard Law and eventually becoming a federal judge. We'd stayed close despite the different worlds we inhabited, bound by shared memories of our father teaching us that a man's worth wasn't measured by his bank account, but by his word. Jesse, Marcus answered on the second ring. Isn't Sarah's wedding tomorrow? Shouldn't you be practicing your father of the bride speech? There's been a development, I said, then explained the situation. The silence on the other end stretched long enough that I wondered if we'd been disconnected. When Marcus spoke again, his voice carried the cold precision that had made him legendary in courtrooms. David Sterling III. I've heard that name. His father's firm has been skirting SEC regulations for years. Give me 6 hours. My second call was to Tommy Rodriguez. If Marcus was my scalpel, Tommy was my sledgehammer. You sound like we're back in Da Nang, Tommy said without preamble. What's the situation? The Sterling boy just banned me from my daughter's wedding. I need everything you found, and I need you there tomorrow. Copy that. I'll bring backup. Some of the guys from the unit have been itching for a reunion anyway. The third call required more finesse. Jennifer Walsh was CEO of Pinnacle Marketing, where Sarah had worked for 3 years. I'd met her several times at company events, and she'd always struck me as someone who valued loyalty and hard work over pedigree. Her direct number was in my phone from when she'd called to personally thank me after Morrison Construction had renovated their offices under budget and ahead of schedule. Jesse Morrison, she answered warmly. What a pleasant surprise. I'm looking forward to Sarah's wedding tomorrow. That's actually why I'm calling Jennifer. There's something you should know about the Sterling family's interest in your husband's investment firm. I could practically hear her shifting into business mode. Go on. They're not just hoping for an investment. Their firm is 3 months from bankruptcy. They need your husband's capital to avoid complete collapse. The wedding is essentially a stage to demonstrate their continued social relevance. That's illuminating. But why are you telling me this? Because David Sterling has been manipulating my daughter to get to you. Did you know he's been pressuring you to give Sarah's upcoming VP promotion to his cousin instead? The sharp intake of breath told me she hadn't known. Sarah's the best marketing director I have. She's earned that promotion 3 times over. The Sterlings don't see it that way. They see my daughter as a stepping stone to your connections, nothing more. Jesse, I appreciate this information, but why call me tonight? Because tomorrow things are going to unfold in a way the Sterlings don't expect. I wanted to give you the courtesy of a warning and to ask a favor. Whatever happens, Sarah's career shouldn't suffer for the Sterling schemes. You have my word on that. In fact, I think it's time Sarah learned exactly how valued she is at Pinnacle. I'll see you tomorrow, Jesse. The fourth call was to Charles at the country club. I'll be there at 5 a.m. with a cashier's check for the full amount the Sterlings owe, plus tomorrow's event costs. I want a receipt showing Morrison Construction as the official host, and my name as the primary on all contracts. Jesse, that's over $100,000. $110,000 to be exact. I've been saving for my daughter's wedding for 28 years. Might as well use it to teach some lessons about respect. My final call of the evening was to Robert Chen. I need you at the country club by 6 a.m. with every document we've gathered. Bring your assistant, the one who used to work for the SEC. We're going to need witnesses for what's about to happen. As I hung up, my phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. Dad, I'm so sorry. I don't know what's gotten into David. This isn't right. I love you. I typed back, I love you too, sweetheart. Get some rest. Tomorrow will be a day people remember. Then, I went to my closet and pulled out my best suit, the one Helen had helped me pick for our 35th anniversary. Next to it hung my army dress uniform, still crisp after all these years. On impulse, I grabbed both. In my safe, I counted out the cashier's checks I'd been collecting over the years, each one a birthday or Christmas, when I'd added to Sarah's wedding fund, instead of taking that vacation or buying that new truck. $120,000 meant to give my daughter the perfect start to married life. Well, it would still do that, just not in the way anyone expected. I spent the rest of the night in my workshop, the one Sarah used to play in while I built furniture. The smell of sawdust and wood stain always helped me think. I pulled out a piece of cherry wood I'd been saving for something special and began to work. By 4 a.m. I'd finished. A simple picture frame, elegant in its craftsmanship, holding a photo of Helen and me on our wedding day. We'd been nobody special by Sterling standards, just a construction worker and a school teacher standing in Helen's parents' backyard, surrounded by people who actually wanted to be there. On the back, I carved an inscription. True worth is measured in the lives we touch and the love we leave behind. For Sarah, from Dad. As I wrapped the frame, I thought about what Helen would say about my plans for the day ahead. She'd probably call me a stubborn fool, then kiss me and say to give them hell. Helen never did tolerate bullies, especially ones who hurt our little girl. The eastern sky was just beginning to lighten when I loaded everything into my truck. Somewhere across town, David Sterling III was probably sleeping soundly, confident he'd put the embarrassing father-in-law problem to rest. He was about to learn that some problems don't stay buried. Some problems rise up stronger for the pressure and bring the whole house down. I started the engine and headed for the country club, humming an old tune Helen used to love. It was going to be a beautiful day for a wedding, even if it wasn't quite the wedding anyone had planned. I arrived at the Sterling Country Club as the first hints of dawn painted the sky pink and gold. The morning air carried that peculiar stillness that comes before a storm, though the weather forecast had promised nothing but sunshine. I parked my truck in the service entrance, right where I'd parked it 5 years ago during the renovation project. Some things I reflected come full circle in ways you never expect. Miguel was already there unlocking the maintenance doors. His eyes widened when he saw me approaching in my best suit cashier's check, visible in my hand. Mr. Morrison, the wedding's not until this afternoon. Morning, Miguel. Is Charles in his office yet? He will be in 10 minutes. He always arrives early on big event days. Miguel paused, studying my face. Is everything all right? Everything's about to be exactly as it should be. Charles arrived at 5:15, looking harried already. The Sterling events had that effect on people. He stopped short when he saw me waiting outside his office. Jesse, what are you doing here? Settling debts, I said, following him inside. The Sterlings owe this club $110,000. 50 from previous events, 60 for today. I'm here to pay it in full. Charles sank into his chair, staring at the check I placed on his desk. Jesse, this is… Why would you… Because my daughter deserves a wedding without bill collectors hovering in the wings. Because I've been saving for this day since she was born. And because the Sterlings need to learn that money isn't the only form of power. He picked up the check with trembling fingers. If you pay this, the contracts transfer to you. You become the official host. Every vendor, every arrangement, every detail becomes your responsibility and your decision. I'm counting on it. I need receipts for everything, Charles. Every penny accounted for, every contract transferred to my name. And I need it done before the Sterlings arrive. As Charles processed the payment, typing with the speed of someone who'd waited too long for resolution, I made my next call. Roberto's Flowers, a tired voice answered. Roberto, it's Jesse Morrison, Sarah's father. I understand you're providing flowers for the Sterling wedding today. See, Mr. Morrison, though to be honest, I wasn't sure we'd actually deliver. They still owe $40,000 from their last event. What would you say if I told you I'm now the official host of the wedding, and I'm prepared to pay your past invoice in full plus today's arrangements? The silence stretched so long I wondered if he'd fainted. You would do this? On one condition. I want some changes to the arrangements. Pull every white orchid they ordered. Replace them with Helen roses, the coral ones. Sarah's mother loved those. But Mrs. Sterling specifically said, Mrs. Sterling is no longer making the decisions. Can you do it? For a man who pays his debts, I'll make it rain roses, Mr. Morrison. One by one, I called every vendor. The caterer who'd been promised payment for 8 months. The photographer who'd been told to focus only on the Sterling family guests. The band leader who'd been given a playlist of songs Sarah had never heard of. Each call followed the same pattern: shock gratitude, and then eager cooperation when I mentioned both payment and changes. By 6:30, my transformation team was assembling. Tommy Rodriguez arrived with 4 men from our old unit, all wearing dark suits that couldn't quite hide their military bearing. Marcus drove up in his BMW, accompanied by a young woman carrying a briefcase that practically screamed federal authority. Robert Chen brought 2 assistants and boxes of documents. I've got everything, Jesse. Financial records, contracts, correspondence. If they want to play hardball, we're ready for the major leagues. The vendors began arriving at 7. Each one stopped by the impromptu command center I'd established in the club's library to shake my hand and confirm the changes. The menu shifted from foie gras and truffle oil to the elegant comfort foods Sarah actually enjoyed. The playlist evolved from classical pieces no one under 70 would recognize to the jazz and soul music Sarah had grown up hearing from my workshop radio. At 8 o'clock, Jennifer Walsh arrived with her husband and 2 members of their board. Jesse, she said, pulling me aside. After our conversation last night, I did some digging. The Sterling firm isn't just failing. They're under investigation for securities fraud. My husband's firm won't touch them with a 10-foot pole. And Sarah's promotion? Announced officially Monday morning. VP of Strategic Development with a salary that will make the Sterling's eyes water. She's earned every penny. The Sterling family arrived at 9, sweeping into the club like they owned it. Patricia Sterling, resplendent in a champagne-colored dress that probably cost more than most people's cars, stopped dead when she saw me conferring with the catering director. What are you doing here? Ice could have formed on her words. Good morning, Patricia. I'm reviewing the arrangements for my daughter's wedding. Your daughter's… Charles. She spun toward the general manager, who had just emerged from his office. What is this man doing, interfering with my event? Charles approached with the careful steps of someone navigating a minefield. He held out the receipts I'd requested, the stack thick with vindication. Mrs. Sterling, Mr. Morrison has paid all outstanding balances for your family's events, including today's wedding. According to club policy, that makes him the official host with full decision-making authority. Patricia's face went through several shades of red before settling on an alarming purple. That's impossible. We have contracts. Had contracts. Robert Chen stepped forward every inch the Harvard-trained lawyer, despite Patricia's obvious disdain for his ethnicity, which were nullified the moment you failed to pay deposits. Mr. Morrison's payment reinstated them under his name. David Jr. appeared, his face already flushed with anger. This is extortion, we'll sue. Marcus chose that moment to introduce himself. Judge Marcus Morrison, Federal District Court. Jesse's brother. I'd be fascinated to see that lawsuit, especially given what my colleagues at the SEC have been telling me about your firm's creative accounting. The young woman with the briefcase smiled pleasantly. Agent Sarah Foster, FBI Financial Crimes Division. Just here as a wedding guest, of course. Though if anyone mentions securities fraud, I do have my recorder with me. The Sterlings stood frozen, their carefully constructed superiority crumbling like week-old flowers. But the best was yet to come. Where's David? I asked, checking my watch. The groom should probably know about these changes. He's getting ready in the groom's suite, Patricia managed through clenched teeth. Tommy, why don't you and the boys go explain the situation to him? Make sure he understands that as the host, I control the guest list. And Patricia. That list just got very selective. As Tommy's unit headed upstairs, I turned back to the vendors, who were watching the drama with barely concealed delight. Let's continue with the changes, shall we, Roberto? How are those coral roses coming along? The morning flew by in a whirlwind of adjustments. Every Sterling mandated element was systematically replaced with something that actually reflected Sarah and her values. The Sterling silver place settings became the club's elegant but simpler china. The 7-tier monstrosity of a cake became a 3-tier creation decorated with sugar flowers matching Helen's roses. At 10:30, David III stormed into the library where I'd established headquarters. His perfect hair was slightly mussed, suggesting Tommy's explanation had been thorough. You can't do this. He slammed both hands on the antique desk. I'm calling our lawyers. Please do, Robert said mildly. I'll be happy to discuss the prenuptial agreement you tried to secretly force on Sarah. The one that violates state law in 16 different ways. David's face went white. How did you know about that? Or know about your gambling debts? Or the affair with Miranda from your office? I kept my voice conversational, but I could see each word landing like a hammer blow. When you told me I wasn't important enough for your wedding, you forgot something crucial. Unimportant people are invisible. We can go places, hear things, learn secrets that important people think are safely hidden. What do you want? David's voice had lost all its polish. I want my daughter to know the truth before she makes the biggest mistake of her life. I want the investors your family is trying to con to understand exactly who they're dealing with. And I want you to understand that there's a price for treating people as stepping stones. David straightened his tie with shaking hands. You're destroying our family. No, son. You did that all by yourself. I'm just removing the fancy paint job so everyone can see the termite damage. Patricia burst in her phone, clutched in her manicured hand. The Weatherbys just canceled. And the Prescotts. And the entire table from Sterling Investments. What did you do? Marcus smiled. I may have made some calls to friends in the financial sector. Mentioned the SEC investigation, the FBI's interest in your husband's firm. Amazing how quickly rats leave a sinking ship, isn't it? By 11, the transformation was complete. The Sterling wedding had become Sarah's wedding, infused with warmth and authenticity, instead of cold ambition. The vendor staff, energized by actual payment and respect, worked with an enthusiasm that transformed the entire atmosphere. But my greatest satisfaction came from a small change I'd requested from the printer. The wedding programs delivered just an hour before guests would arrive. Now read, The Wedding of Sarah Morrison and David Sterling III, hosted by Jesse Morrison, Morrison Construction. Below that, in elegant script, in loving memory of Helen Morrison, whose grace and wisdom live on in her daughter. Tommy found me on the terrace looking out over the grounds where guests would soon gather. The boys have the entrances covered. Only people on your approved list get in. I handed him the list I'd prepared. Sarah's real friends. My construction crew who'd known her since she was tiny. The teachers who'd shaped her. The mentors who'd guided her career. People who measured worth in character, not bank accounts. "Where's Sarah?" Tommy asked. "On her way. She doesn't know any of this yet." I checked my watch. But she's about to learn exactly how important her unimportant father can be. As if on cue, my phone rang. Sarah's name on the screen made my heart clench. In 1 hour, she'd arrive expecting to marry into the Sterling dynasty. Instead, she'd discover the truth about everything. I answered the phone, ready to begin the hardest conversation of my life. "Hi, sweetheart. Yes, I'll be there. Actually, I'm already at the club. There are some things we need to discuss." Sarah arrived at the Sterling Country Club at 12:32 and a half hours before the ceremony was scheduled to begin. I watched from the library window as her Honda Civic pulled up to the entrance, a modest car that the Sterlings had repeatedly suggested she replace with something more appropriate. My daughter emerged in jeans and a button-down shirt, her wedding dress presumably waiting in the bridal suite. She moved with the nervous energy of a bride, but I could see the tension in her shoulders, the weight of the previous night's conversation still pressing down on her. Tommy's man at the door, Rodriguez, directed her to the library instead of the bridal suite. I saw her confusion, the little furrow between her brows that had appeared even when she was a toddler, puzzling over building blocks. She opened the library door, and her eyes went wide. The room had become a command center with Robert and his assistants organizing documents, Marcus on the phone with what sounded like another federal judge, and me standing by the window in my best suit. "Dad, what's going on? Why is everyone here? I should be getting ready." "Sit down, sweetheart. We need to talk." The confusion in her eyes shifted to alarm. "Is something wrong? Did something happen to the wedding?" "Yes and no." I guided her to the leather couch Helen and I had donated to the club years ago. "The wedding is still happening. But some things have changed, and you need to know the truth before you make any decisions." "The truth about what?" I nodded to Robert, who handed me a folder. 3 weeks ago, I found these documents in David's apartment. I wasn't snooping. They fell from his desk while I was helping you move boxes. Sarah's hands trembled as she took the papers. I watched her face as she read, saw the moment when the legal language penetrated, when phrases like separate property and infidelity clause registered in her marketing-trained mind. David said he didn't believe in prenups. He said they were for people who expected to fail. There's more. I handed her Tommy's surveillance photos. David entering a hotel with Miranda. Credit card receipts for jewelry Sarah had never received. Records of dinners at restaurants during times he'd claimed to be working late. Sarah's breathing became shallow, rapid. "No, there's an explanation. There has to be." And this. The final folder, the one that would hurt the most. David's emails to his father discussing the Sarah situation and how her connection to Jennifer Walsh made the marriage strategically valuable despite her background. My daughter read in silence, tears sliding down her cheeks and spotting the pages. When she finished, she looked up at me with eyes that had aged years and minutes. "How long have you known?" "About the prenup 3 weeks. The affairs 2 weeks. The business problems and their plans to use your connections about 10 days. Why didn't you tell me immediately?" I took her hands, feeling the engagement ring David had given her, all flash and no substance. Because I needed to be sure. Because I wanted to have all the facts. And because I hoped I was wrong. Sarah pulled her hands away, standing abruptly. "I need to think. She paced to the window, looking out at the grounds where chairs were being arranged. "Oh God, people are coming. 400 people are coming to watch me marry a man who—" "No," I said firmly. 15 people are coming to support you whatever you decide. The Sterling guest list has been adjusted." What do you mean, adjusted? Marcus stepped forward. Your father paid all the Sterling family's outstanding debts to the club this morning. That makes him the official host of today's event. He's revised the guest list to include only people who actually care about you. Sarah turned to stare at me. You paid? Dad, that must have been $110,000. Every penny I saved for your wedding. I met her eyes steadily. Worth it to protect you from making a mistake that would have destroyed you. The door burst open before Sarah could respond. David entered in his tuxedo, his perfect facade showing cracks. Patricia and David Jr. flanked him, their faces masks of barely controlled fury. Sarah. David rushed toward her, but Tommy's men stepped smoothly into his path. Baby, whatever your father's told you, I can explain. Explain the prenup. Sarah's voice was steady as steel. The one you said you'd never ask me to sign. That was just a formality, something my father's lawyers insisted on. I wasn't really going to… Explain, Miranda. Sarah pulled out the photos, throwing them at his feet. The jewelry receipts. The hotel rooms. David's mask slipped further. Those are business meetings taken out of context. You know how these things can look. Explain this email. Sarah held up the printed message. Quote, the Walsh connection alone makes this marriage worthwhile. Once we secure the merger, we can reassess the situation. Unquote. Patricia tried to salvage the situation. Sarah, dear, all families have their private discussions. David loves you. The wedding is in 2 hours. Think of your reputation if you cancel now. Jennifer Walsh chose that moment to enter impeccable in navy blue, her presence commanding immediate attention. Sarah's reputation. I'd say her reputation for good judgment and integrity will only be enhanced by walking away from manipulation and lies. Jennifer. Patricia's composure cracked completely. We weren't expecting you so early. I imagine not. Just as you weren't expecting my husband to reject your merger proposal. We don't do business with frauds, Mrs. Sterling, and we certainly don't let them manipulate our best employees. She turned to Sarah, warmth replacing the ice she'd directed at the Sterlings. Sarah, I came early to tell you personally. Your promotion to VP of Strategic Development is official. The announcement goes out Monday. You've earned it through your talent and hard work, not through any connections to these people. David made one last desperate play. Sarah, please. We can work this out. The wedding, the guests, everything's ready. Don't humiliate me like this. Sarah laughed, a sound sharp enough to cut glass. Humiliate you? The way you humiliated my father by banning him from my wedding. The way you've humiliated me every time you corrected my pronunciation or suggested my friends weren't good enough. She pulled off her engagement ring, the massive diamond catching the light one final time. You want to talk about important people? My father built this club with his bare hands. He's worth more than your entire family combined, not in money, but in integrity. And you're not worthy to shine his work boots. David's face contorted with rage. You can't do this. We had a deal. No. I stepped forward, placing myself between David and my daughter. You had a scheme, and like most schemes built on a rotten foundation, it's collapsing. David Jr. tried bluster. We'll sue you for breach of promise, emotional distress, financial damages. Agent Foster from the FBI cleared her throat delicately. Speaking of financial matters, Mr. Sterling, your firm is under federal investigation for securities fraud. You might want to save your legal resources for that battle. The color drained from both Sterling men's faces. Patricia swayed on her designer heels. Additionally, Marcus added conversationally, Jesse's payment this morning included a rather interesting contract clause. Any disruption to today's event by uninvited persons will result in immediate trespass charges. Tommy, I believe you and your team are authorized to escort the Sterling family from the premises. Our pleasure, Your Honor. Tommy moved forward with his unit, their intentions clear. David made one final appeal to Sarah. You're making a mistake. You'll never find anyone else like me." Sarah stepped forward, and for a moment, I thought she might slap him. Instead, she smiled with a grace her mother would have been proud of. "You're right. I'll never find another lying, cheating, manipulative social climber who sees me as a business asset rather than a person. Thank God for that." She turned to Tommy. "Please see them out. All of them." As the Sterling family was escorted away, their protests echoing through the halls they'd once treated as their personal domain. Sarah collapsed onto the couch, the weight of the revelations finally hitting her. "The wedding," she whispered. "All those people coming. The food, the flowers, everything." I sat beside her, pulling her into the same embrace I'd used when she was 5, and had skinned her knee falling off her bike. "The vendors are all here. Your real friends are coming. Emma's doing the flowers with Roberto coral roses, like Mom loved. The jazz quartet you originally wanted is setting up. The menu is what you chose before Patricia overruled you." Sarah looked up at me, mascara streaking her cheeks. "You changed everything." "I changed it back to what you wanted, what you deserve. But I can't get married today. Not after—" Jennifer Walsh sat on Sarah's other side. "Who says you have to get married? You've got a beautiful venue, amazing food, and people who love you gathering to celebrate. Why not celebrate your freedom instead? Your promotion, your narrow escape from a lifetime of manipulation." Sarah's eyes widened. "Turn my wedding into a party." "The best party this club's ever seen," I confirmed. "No Sterlings, no pressure, no lies. Just you and the people who actually matter." For the first time since she'd arrived, Sarah smiled. It was watery and uncertain, but it was real. "Can we do that? Just change everything." "Sweetheart, I moved heaven and earth to give you the wedding you deserve. Turning it into a freedom celebration, that's just a minor adjustment." Sarah hugged me tight, and I felt her tears soak through my suit jacket. "I love you, Dad. I'm sorry I let them make me forget what really matters." "You didn't forget," I said, holding my daughter as the Sterling ghosts were exorcised from the building. "You just got a little lost. But you're found now." Looking over Sarah's shoulder, I saw my team springing into action. Roberto was already changing the Sterling Morrison wedding signs to Sarah Morrison's Celebration of New Beginnings. The bandleader was adjusting his playlist to include more celebration songs and fewer wedding marches. In 2 hours, guests would arrive expecting a society wedding. Instead, they'd witness something far more powerful, a young woman choosing herself over compromise integrity, over image and truth, over the elaborate lies that had almost trapped her. And somewhere probably, at their ostentatious mansion, the Sterling family would be discovering that when you try to ban a father from his daughter's life, you might just find yourself banned from your own, carefully constructed world. By 2 o'clock, the Sterling Country Club had undergone a metamorphosis, as complete as any butterflies. What had been designed as a monument to Sterling excess was transforming into a celebration of authentic joy, and I stood in the center of it all, watching my team work miracles. Roberto had outdone himself with the flowers. The stark white orchids Patricia had insisted upon had vanished, replaced by waves of coral Helen roses, mixed with wildflowers Sarah used to pick from our backyard. The arrangements looked like happiness itself had bloomed throughout the venue. "Mr. Morrison." Roberto called out, his arms full of centerpieces. "Your wife, she would have loved these. No, I remember when she came to my shop, always choosing flowers with such care. She would have loved them." I agreed, touching one silk-soft petal. "She also would have loved seeing you paid in full for your beautiful work." Roberto's eyes misted. $40,000 paid just like that. My wife, she cried when I called her. We can finally take that anniversary trip to Mexico we've been postponing for 5 years. Emma, Sarah's childhood friend and budding florist, worked alongside him. The Sterlings had rejected her services as amateur, but her touches brought personal meaning to every arrangement. She'd woven in forget-me-nots from seeds Sarah had given her in high school, and baby's breath from the plant Helen had started in our garden 20 years ago. In the kitchen, chaos had given way to controlled creativity. The executive chef, freed from Patricia's pretentious menu, was crafting the comfort-elegant food Sarah had originally requested. Beef tenderloin that actually tasted like beef, not hidden under 17 sauces. The mac and cheese Sarah had wanted as a side elevated with truffle oil, but still recognizable as the comfort food she loved. The seafood station David had insisted on had been replaced with a taco bar, complete with handmade tortillas and Sarah's favorite street corn. "Never thought I'd serve tacos at a Sterling event," the chef told me with a grin. "But then, this isn't a Sterling event anymore, is it?" Not even close. I confirmed sampling the salsa verde. This is a Morrison celebration, and Morrisons believe in food that makes people happy. The cake had been the biggest last-minute miracle. The 7-tier monstrosity Patricia had commissioned sat in the kitchen like a monument to excess. But the club's pastry chef, a young woman named Anna, who'd been stifled by Sterling demands for months, had worked magic. "I kept the top tier," she explained, showing me her handiwork. "Redesigned it with sugar coral roses to match the real ones. Then I created something new." The something new was a dessert station that would have made Sarah squeal with delight. Individual chocolate lava cakes like the ones from our favorite restaurant. Her grandmother's apple pie recipe, which I'd provided from Helen's handwritten cookbook. Cookies and milk shooters, because Sarah had once told David it was her favorite midnight snack, and he'd looked at her like she'd suggested eating dirt. The band was setting up on the terrace, and I stopped to check their playlist. Gone were the classical pieces that would have put half the guests to sleep. In their place was the music of Sarah's actual life. The Motown classics I'd played in my workshop, the jazz standards Helen had loved, the contemporary hits Sarah and her friends could dance to. Mr. Morrison. The band leader, an older black gentleman named Lewis, shook my hand warmly. "I just wanted to thank you. The Sterlings had us playing background music all evening, nothing anyone could actually dance to. Now we get to really perform." "Play like you're celebrating freedom," I told him, "because that's exactly what we're doing." My phone buzzed with incoming texts from guests getting ready. Sarah's college friends confirming they were coming despite the last-minute changes. My construction crew, threatening to show up in their work boots if their wives didn't stop fussing over their ties. Teachers, mentors, real friends who measured worth in character rather than portfolios. But it was the text from Judge Williams that made me smile widest. "Heard about the Sterling situation. My wife and I would be honored to attend Sarah's celebration. Sometimes the best weddings are the ones that don't happen." Tommy appeared at my elbow, his phone in hand. "Interesting development. My guy at Sterling Mansion says they're in full panic mode. Apparently, word's gotten out about the FBI investigation and the canceled merger. Their phone's been ringing nonstop with canceled appointments and withdrawn invitations." "Couldn't happen to more important people," I said dryly. "Also, David tried to go to 3 different bars, but his credit cards were all declined. Seems Daddy cut him off." I felt a moment of pity for the boy, but only a moment. He'd tried to isolate my daughter from her family, hide his affairs, and trap her in a prenuptial that would have left her with nothing. The universe has a way of serving justice, and today, it was working overtime. Sarah emerged from the bridal suite at 2:30, and my breath caught. She'd decided against the elaborate Sterling-approved wedding dress, choosing instead a simple coral sundress that Helen had helped her pick out last year. Her hair fell in loose waves, instead of the architectural updo Patricia had mandated. She looked like herself again. "Dad," she said, taking in the transformed venue. "It's perfect. It's actually perfect." "You're perfect," I said, meaning it. "Strong enough to see the truth, brave enough to act on it, wise enough to choose yourself." Jennifer Walsh approached us, champagne already in hand. "Sarah, I've been spreading the word about your promotion. You have 3 CEOs asking for your card, and the owner of that new tech startup wants to discuss a potential partnership with Pinnacle." Sarah blushed. "I haven't even officially started the position yet." "Success doesn't wait for Monday morning," Jennifer said. "Neither does revenge. The Sterlings are about to learn what happens when you underestimate the people who actually do the work. As if on cue, my phone rang. Charles, the club manager, sounded breathless. Jesse thought you should know. Mrs. Sterling just called demanding to know why their corporate membership was revoked. I had the pleasure of informing her that members who don't pay their bills lose their privileges. Their membership is revoked. As of today, that $110,000 you paid, it cleared their debt, but didn't restore their standing. The board voted unanimously. The Sterling family is permanently banned from the property. I shared the news with Sarah, who laughed for the first time all day. Real, genuine laughter that reminded me of the little girl who used to help me build birdhouses in the garage. Banned from their own country club. There's poetic justice in that. Speaking of justice, Marcus said, joining our group. I've been in touch with some colleagues. The SEC investigation into Sterling Enterprises is expanding. Seems David Jr. has been cooking books for years, using social connections to hide fraudulent investments. Today's very public implosion won't help their case. At 3 o'clock, guests began arriving. Not the 400 social climbers and business connections the Sterlings had invited, but the 68 people who actually mattered to Sarah. Each arrival brought fresh energy, genuine smiles, and often tears when they heard the full story. Mrs. Henderson, Sarah's third-grade teacher, clutched my hands. I always knew she was too good for that boy. Remember when she organized the fundraiser for the school library? That's the real Sarah, not whoever the Sterlings were trying to create. My foreman, Big Mike, arrived with his wife, both beaming. Heard you took down some rich folks who forgot where they came from. Proud to know you, boss. Sarah's college friends descended in a group armed with embarrassing stories and fierce loyalty. Her roommate, Lisa, demoted from maid of honor for being too common, raised a toast before the official reception even began. To Sarah Morrison, who just proved that Princeton degrees and trust funds can't buy class. At 3:30, an unexpected guest arrived. Rachel Chen Roberts' daughter, and an investigative journalist for the Washington Post, approached with her photographer. Mr. Morrison, Sarah. I'm working on a series about social manipulation and financial fraud among elite families. The Sterling situation is exactly the kind of story people need to hear. Would you be willing to talk? Sarah looked at me, then squared her shoulders. Yes, people should know what almost happened here. Maybe it'll help someone else escape a similar trap. As Rachel conducted preliminary interviews, the transformation continued. The string quartet had become a jazz ensemble. The formal receiving line had become a huggy, tearful reunion. The assigned seating had given way to organic groupings of people who actually wanted to talk to each other. Then, at 4 o'clock, just as the celebration was officially beginning, one final carload of guests arrived. 3 women emerged, all looking uncertain, but determined. I recognized them from the Sterling social circle wives of David Jr.'s business partners. Mr. Morrison. The eldest, Margaret Whitfield, approached carefully. We know we weren't invited to, whatever this has become, but we wanted to tell Sarah something. Sarah joined us, wariness replacing her newfound joy. Mrs. Whitfield. My dear, Margaret said softly, we came to apologize, and to thank you. What you did today standing up to them. My daughter is trapped in a similar situation with Patricia Sterling's nephew. Seeing your courage has given her the strength to break free. The other women nodded, sharing their own stories of Sterling manipulation, pressure, and social blackmail. By the time they finished, Sarah was crying again, but these were tears of connection, not pain. Stay, she said impulsively. Please stay. This isn't about important versus unimportant people anymore. It's about real versus fake, and you've just shown which side you're choosing. As the women gratefully accepted, I felt Helen's presence as strongly as if she stood beside me. This was what she'd always taught, that grace meant extending kindness, even to those who'd stood by, while others were cruel if they showed genuine repentance. The sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of coral that matched our roses. In an hour, Sarah would stand before these assembled friends and tell her story. The Sterling dynasty would crumble a little more with each word of truth. But for now, I watched my daughter move through the crowd, head high, smile genuine, surrounded by people who valued her for herself. The $120,000 I'd spent had purchased something priceless: Sarah's freedom, her future, and the knowledge that her unimportant father would move heaven and earth to protect her. "Nice work, Morrison," Tommy said, appearing with 2 beers from my cooler, not champagne from sterling silver buckets. "Though I've got to ask, what's your endgame here?" I took a long drink, considering. You know what? There isn't one. This isn't about destroying the Sterlings, though they're doing a fine job of that themselves. It's about building Sarah back up. Everything else is just gravity pulling down what should have fallen long ago. As if to underscore my point, my phone buzzed with a news alert. Sterling Enterprises stock plummets on SEC investigation news. The financial pages would be brutal tomorrow. The society pages even worse. But on the terrace of the club I'd built with my own hands, surrounded by flowers paid for with honor, and food served with joy, none of that mattered. What mattered was Sarah laughing with her true friends, her light no longer dimmed by Sterling shadows. The transformation was complete. The Sterling wedding had died. In its place, something far more valuable had been born: a celebration of truth, integrity, and the power of a father's love to change everything. The November sun streamed through my kitchen window, casting golden light across the worn wooden table where Sarah and I shared breakfast. 6 months had passed since the Sterling implosion, and my daughter looked like a different person. Gone was the anxious edge that had crept into her expression during her time with David. Her smile reached her eyes again, and her laughter came easily. "Dad, you're not going to believe what happened yesterday," Sarah said, spreading cream cheese on her bagel, with the same enthusiasm she'd shown as a child. "Jennifer called me into her office, and I thought I was in trouble for the Henderson campaign going over budget. And I prompted, though her grin told me the news was good. She promoted me again, Senior VP of Strategic Development. She said my work exposing the ethical issues in the Sterling partnerships set a new standard for corporate integrity at Pinnacle." I reached across the table to squeeze her hand. "That's my girl. Helen would be so proud." Sarah's eyes misted at the mention of her mother, but it was the gentle sadness of fond memory, now not the sharp pain of recent loss. "I went to the cemetery yesterday, told her about everything. I know it sounds crazy, but I felt like she was laughing about the Sterlings getting their comeuppance." "That sounds exactly like your mother," I agreed. "She never did suffer fools gladly." My phone buzzed with a text from Michael Chen, and Sarah noticed my smile. "Is that from who? I think it's from—" "He's confirming dinner tonight," I said, trying to sound casual. "Says he has something important to discuss." Sarah nearly bounced in her seat. "Dad, he's going to ask your permission to propose. I know it." The relationship between Sarah and Michael had been one of the unexpected gifts to emerge from the Sterling disaster. Michael Chen Roberts' son was everything David Sterling III had pretended to be: genuinely successful, authentically kind, and deeply respectful of family. He'd attended the Freedom Celebration as his father's +1, reconnecting with Sarah after years apart. They'd known each other in college, but had lost touch when Michael went to medical school. Now, as a pediatric surgeon at Children's Hospital, he spent his days saving lives rather than manipulating stock prices. Their first date had been at the taco truck Sarah loved, but David had deemed beneath them. Their second was at the opening of Emma's flower shop, which had flourished thanks to word of mouth from the celebration. "He's already asked for my blessing," I admitted, enjoying Sarah's delighted squeal. 2 weeks ago. "Wanted to do things properly," he said. Showed up in his best suit, nervous as a long-tailed cat in a room full of rocking chairs. "And you said yes." I asked him one question. "Will you love her, even when she insists on eating cereal for dinner, because she's too tired to cook?" He laughed and said he'd join her with his own bowl. That's when I knew. Sarah wiped happy tears from her cheeks. I love him, Dad. It's nothing like with David. Michael sees me, really sees me. Last week I was ranting about a client and he just listened. Then he said, "You're magnificent when you're passionate about something. Not beautiful, not adorable. Magnificent. That's how it should be," I said. Someone who sees your strength as beauty. Speaking of the Sterlings, Sarah said, her voice dropping to a more serious tone. Did you see the news this morning? I had. David Sterling III had been arrested for insider trading, finally bringing down what was left of the Sterling Empire. David Jr. was already serving 18 months in minimum security for securities fraud. Patricia Sterling, according to the Society pages, had fled to their Hamptons estate, which was now in foreclosure. Tommy sent me the mugshot, I admitted. David looked diminished. I almost feel sorry for him, Sarah said. Almost. Then I remember the prenup and the affairs and trying to ban you from my wedding, and the sympathy evaporates. The opposite of love isn't hate, I said, repeating something Helen used to say. It's indifference. The fact that you feel anything at all shows you're still healing. Sarah nodded thoughtfully. Dr. Martinez says the same thing. She's been amazing, by the way. Yesterday, we worked through why I was so susceptible to David's manipulation. Turns out losing Mom made me vulnerable to anyone who seemed certain about the future, even if that certainty was just arrogance in a tuxedo. The doorbell rang before I could respond. Tommy Rodriguez stood on my porch, grinning like he'd won the lottery. Thought you'd want to see this in person, he said, handing me an envelope. Remember that building code violation issue with the Sterling headquarters? Inside was a check for $2.4 million. The settlement from Sterling Enterprises Insurance Company, paying out for the shoddy construction David Jr. had approved against my recommendations. I can't accept this, I said automatically. Like hell you can't, Tommy countered. You saved them from a building collapse. The inspector said another year, and that corner support would have given way. 40 people work on that floor, Jesse. Sarah took the check from my numb fingers. Dad, this is justice. They tried to cut corners and endanger lives. You documented everything, tried to warn them. This is consequence meeting action. I thought about it then, nodded slowly. Morrison Construction could use new equipment. And I've been thinking about that scholarship fund your mother wanted to create. The Helen Morrison Foundation for first-generation college students, Sarah said immediately. Mom would love that. That evening, Michael arrived for dinner, wearing the same nervous expression he'd had 2 weeks earlier. He helped cook, fitting into our kitchen routine, like he'd always been there. When Sarah stepped outside to take a work call, he turned to me. I bought the ring, he said quietly. My grandmother's diamond reset in a new band. Nothing flashy, just elegant, like Sarah. When I asked, next Saturday, I've arranged a surprise picnic in the botanical gardens where we had our third date, her favorite spot by the lily pond. She'll say yes, I assured him. I know, he said, then grinned. But I'm still terrified. In surgery, I know every possible complication and how to handle it. With Sarah, she could say anything, do anything, and I'd still be amazed. That's the difference between David and you, I said. He wanted to control her. You want to experience life alongside her. Sarah returned, and dinner continued with easy conversation about work friends and plans for the holidays. Michael fit into our small family like the missing piece we hadn't known we needed. When he left, Sarah walked him to his car, returning with stars in her eyes. He's the one, Dad. I knew it the moment he made me laugh so hard, I snorted coffee at the freedom celebration. David would have been mortified. Michael said it was adorable, and that he hoped to make me laugh like that every day. The next Saturday, my phone rang at 2 p.m. Sarah's voice was breathless with joy. I said yes, Dad. I said yes. The ring was Grandma Chen's, and he reset it, and he cried when he asked, and I cried when I answered, and people in the garden applauded, and it was perfect. Congratulations, sweetheart. When do you want to have the wedding? Spring, she said immediately. In your backyard where mom's roses bloom. Just family and real friends. Maybe 50 people. Emma can do wildflowers, and Anna from the club said she'd make individual pies instead of a big cake. And Lewis's jazz quartet already said they'd play for free after what you did for them. Sounds perfect, I said, my throat tight with emotion. Oh, and Dad Michael's parents want to contribute to the wedding. His mother specifically said she wants to help honor my mother's memory. No taking over, no controlling, just helping family. The wedding took place 6 months later, on a perfect May afternoon, when Helen's roses were in full bloom. Sarah wore her grandmother's wedding dress, altered to fit, but maintaining its 1960s charm. Michael waited at the arbor I'd built with my own hands, tears streaming down his face as Sarah walked toward him. I gave the father of the bride speech I'd been preparing for 30 years, telling stories of Sarah's childhood and Helen's dreams for her daughter. When I mentioned how proud Helen would be, a butterfly landed on Sarah's bouquet, staying long enough for the photographer to capture the moment. Judge Williams performed the ceremony, having become a family friend after the Sterling debacle. When he asked who gave this woman in marriage, I responded, her mother and I do, feeling Helen's presence in the whispered breeze that stirred the roses. The reception was everything the Sterling event was supposed to be, and never could have been genuine, joyful, and filled with love. Louis played music that had people of all ages dancing. Anna's individual apple pies were served with ice cream and happy tears. Emma's wildflower arrangements looked like pieces of meadow brought indoors. Tommy gave a toast that had everyone laughing about our Army days and the time I'd stood up to a general who'd insulted our unit. Jesse Morrison has been taking down bullies for 50 years, he concluded. The Sterlings just learned what the U.S. Army already knew: don't mess with Morrison's people. Jennifer Walsh spoke about Sarah's integrity and leadership, announcing a new initiative at Pinnacle, inspired by Sarah's stand against corruption. We're calling it the Morrison Standard, she said. It means choosing truth over profit every time. As the sun set, painting the sky in shades of coral and gold, I danced with my daughter to Isn't She Lovely, the same song I'd sung to her as a baby. Thank you, Dad, Sarah whispered, for saving me from the Sterlings, for showing me what real love looks like, for being the kind of man who teaches through example. You saved yourself, I corrected. I just cleared the path. With a $120,000 bulldozer, she laughed. Best money I ever spent, I said, meaning it. Later, as the reception wound down, I found myself standing by Helen's rose garden, a glass of bourbon in hand. The sound of laughter drifted from the reception tent, and I could see Sarah and Michael dancing with their friends, lost in their own world of happiness. We did it, Helen, I said quietly. Our girl found her way to real love. Rachel Chen approached her article about the Sterling collapse, having won a Pulitzer nomination. Mr. Morrison, I wanted to thank you again. The Sterling story opened up a whole network of similar frauds. 23 families have come forward with tales of manipulation and financial abuse. Just glad something good came from it, I said. My editor wants me to write a book about it. Would you be willing to participate? I considered it. Only if the profits go to the Helen Morrison Foundation, and only if you tell the whole truth that money and status are worthless without integrity. Deal, Rachel said, shaking my hand. What would you want readers to take away from the story? I watched Sarah laugh at something Michael whispered, saw the way their hands found each other without conscious thought, noticed how the people around them smiled, just from proximity to their joy. That love isn't about impressing people or meeting social expectations, I said. It's about seeing someone's truth and choosing to stand beside them. It's about families who show up, friends who stay real, and partners who make you more yourself, not less. And fathers who'll spend their life savings to protect their daughters. That's not spending, I corrected. That's investing. And look at the returns. As if to underscore my point, Sarah caught my eye across the garden and blew me a kiss. Michael raised his glass in a toast. The wedding guests, my construction crew, mixed with surgeons, teachers mingling with CEOs, all united by genuine affection rather than social climbing, represented everything the Sterling wedding could never have been. Mr. Morrison. Rachel asked, "What would you say to other fathers in similar situations, watching their children get pulled into toxic relationships with wealthy manipulators?" I thought about it carefully. Trust your instincts. Don't be intimidated by money or status. And remember that the most important title you'll ever have isn't CEO, or doctor, or judge. It's dad. Sometimes that means building a treehouse. Sometimes it means teaching them to change a tire. And sometimes it means spending every penny you've saved to show them what they're really worth. The party continued into the night, but I slipped away to my workshop, the place where I'd taught Sarah to measure twice, and cut once to sand with the grain, to build things that last. On my workbench sat my latest project, a cradle made from reclaimed wood from the Sterling Country Club renovation. Something beautiful from something that had seemed worthless. Sarah found me there an hour later, still in her wedding dress, but barefoot now, looking like the little girl who used to follow me around with her toy hammer. "Working on my wedding day," she teased. "Just thinking," I said. "Your mother and I used to dream about this day. We'd plan your wedding while you slept in your crib. But we never imagined the journey you'd have to take to get here." "The journey made me who I am," Sarah said. "Without the Sterlings, I might never have learned to recognize real love. Without their cruelty, I might not appreciate Michael's kindness. Without their lies, I might not value truth so deeply." "Helen used to say that wisdom comes from survived mistakes," I said. "You've got a PhD in wisdom now." Sarah hugged me tight, her wedding dress crinkling. "I love you, Dad. Thank you for being exactly who you are, a man who builds things that last, whether it's buildings or boundaries." As we walked back to the reception together, the sounds of celebration growing louder, I thought about the price of integrity. $120,000 had seemed like everything when I was saving it, penny by penny, year by year. But watching Sarah dance with Michael surrounded by people who loved her for herself, I knew I'd gotten a bargain. The Sterling wedding had cost everything, and would have given nothing. The Morrison wedding cost what we could afford, and gave us priceless joy. Helen would have loved the poetry of that. The last guests departed near midnight. Sarah and Michael left for their honeymoon in a shower of birdseed and good wishes. I stood in my backyard, littered with the happy debris of celebration, and felt a deep satisfaction that had nothing to do with revenge and everything to do with love. My phone buzzed with a news alert. David Sterling III had been sentenced to 5 years in federal prison. His father's firm had officially declared bankruptcy. Their country club membership had been auctioned to pay creditors. I deleted the alert without reading the details. The Sterlings had become what they'd always feared, unimportant. Not because they'd lost their money, but because they'd proven that without it, they were nothing. In my workshop, the cradle waited for the next generation. Someday, Sarah's children would learn what their grandfather had taught their mother, that true worth isn't measured in bank accounts or bloodlines, but in the courage to stand up for what's right, and the wisdom to know who really matters. The Helen Morrison Foundation had already funded 12 students' college dreams. Morrison Construction had expanded, taking on projects the Sterling's firm had abandoned. And somewhere in Paris, my daughter was having breakfast with a man who loved her magnificence, not her connections. Life has a way of settling its own scores. The Sterlings had thought they were banning an unimportant construction worker from their exclusive world. Instead, they'd revealed that their world was built on sand, while mine was built on bedrock. I turned off the workshop lights and headed inside. Tomorrow there would be thank you cards to write, photos to organize, memories to preserve. But tonight, I poured a glass of Helen's favorite wine and made a toast to the empty kitchen. To important people everywhere, the ones who show up, stand up, and lift up. May you always build higher than those who try to tear you down. The wine was warm on my tongue, the house quiet around me, and somewhere in the night, I could swear I heard Helen laughing with joy. Did this story resonate with you? Have you ever had to stand up to someone who underestimated your worth or tried to exclude you from your own family's moments? I'd love to hear your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. If this story touched your heart, please consider giving it a like and sharing it with others who might need a reminder that true importance isn't measured by wealth or status. And don't forget to subscribe to hear more stories about standing up for what's right and the power of a parent's love. Thank you for reading, and remember, you are important, you matter, and don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Until next time, keep building your life on foundations of truth, love, and integrity.